Um, there is this story, and I think I might have mentioned, I just think she's amazing. This doctor named Jill Taylor, and Jill Taylor wrote the book, it's called A Stroke of Insight, and to me she's absolutely fascinating because she's this neurologist who one day she's getting in her car to go to work and she has a stroke. And she's a doctor and a neurologist, and she knows she's having a stroke. So she needs to call 911, but unfortunately where the stroke is, she can't recall numbers or names. And so she takes out a business card and matches like the symbols on her business card to her phone, and it took a half an hour just to do that. And she calls her office, but she can't speak. It's just garbled. But apparently she has a good secretary, realized something's wrong, and so they called an ambulance and the police, and they saved her. And the interesting part is, in her story, just having a stroke, like that'd be one of my fears, is to have a stroke. And they said, well, were you scared? Is it painful? And she said, no, I wasn't scared at all. I mean, I knew I had a stroke, but I was actually incredibly calm. And to me, another interesting part is, so she's had this stroke and she can't recall names and numbers, but she said the interesting part is if, let's say you're a nurse and you go into the room to help with something, if you're very perfunctory and, do it without any emotions, she couldn't see the person. But if the person came in and they were happy or loving or joyful, she said then she could see the nurse. And one of her takeaways is, listen, all our brains work that way. It's just covered up with a lot of internal speak and logic, that you really do notice the emotions that people bring into the world, be they good or bad. So one of her lines I like is that you are responsible for the attitude that you bring into a room. It does affect everybody. And at one point, she can hear the doctors talking about Gigi, that Gigi is coming. And she thinks to herself, what's a Gigi? And Gigi was actually her mother. Her dad was this Episcopalian priest who died, but her mother is coming. And when her mother, Gigi, comes, she gets into bed with Jill and just starts to hug Jill. And Jill thinks, well, I don't know what this Gigi is, but I love it. And really, with a lot of medical attention and her mother, she got nursed back to health. But the amazing part was this stroke, as awful as it is, what she really found in the stroke and the recovery is this stillness, that at the very center of it all is the divine. And she actually recovers with this incredibly zeal towards religion and spirituality. And she said, I now believe in the power of love. So my only point being, that's like the parable. The parable about the storm is, listen, there are going to be storms in our life, but at the very center, in the stillness, and Christ sleeping at the stern, it means complete peace. And at the center of the storm, no matter what it is, you can find the divine there in stillness. And her second storm is what I find most amazing. Her second storm is, so she's recovered and she goes back to work, but she's a doctor and she's very aggressive, and she said she actually, in her life, what she discovers how about herself is that she used to be very cold to people, very argumentative. She had a reputation that she was very difficult to work with, tend to argue about everything, always having to prove that you're right. I mean, I would hate to go through life like that. And so she decides, what really healed her was this power of love. So she, and I'm trying to edit this down, she said she just made this decision that she is not going to give in to being judgmental or this need to right. I mean, always be right. You can say something and she'll disagree with it. And she can think, you're wrong, but eventually our opinions will change. Or like she'd practice patience. And remember, she admits she has a bad reputation before this. But she said, I want to make sure everybody knows that I love them, that you are responsible for the attitude that you bring into the world. And she wants people to know that she loves them. So really, the second storm was really the negative parts of her personality. And now she's one who just believes in love. And once again, the power of love, helped her connect with all these other people. And I think it's really a good example of what the meaning of the parable is. You have the strange parable that Jesus forces apostles into the boat, and he drives the boat into the storm. And they're really quite frightened. They could die. Water is coming into the boat is being bashed about, and Christ is completely peaceful through it all. And the idea is this: storms are going to come up in our lives. You hate to be negative, but let me predict your future. There's a storm coming. And it may be persecution. Did you know 40% of us will come down with cancer? People are going to have strokes. All that's ahead of us is storms. And in the gospel, Christ gives us two things to weather the storm. The first is each other. If you notice, it happens in the boat, and the boat is a symbol of the church. And so, like, where you guys sit, that's called the nave. In Latin means boat. Think like navy. What gets us through the storms of life is actually, we get through the storms of life together. You're not on your own. Jill Taylor had Gigi. We have each other to pull us through the storms. The second thing we have is our faith and our prayer life. When they call out to Christ, that's a symbol of prayer. That we have a prayer life to get us through all the horrible storms in life. And, in a couple moments, we're going to pray the Our Father. Just FYI, in the Our Father, you know that last line where it says, lead us not into temptation? Jesus never said that. That's actually just a horrible mistranslation. It's not like we have to remind God not to lead us into temptation. That's the job of the devil and the Kardashians. What it really says is, God be with us in times of trial. That in the storms of our life, what we really have is Christ with us, offering us calm and stillness. And I really do believe this. And now, I'm going to get nerdy, but I love stuff like this. So there's all these studies on the effect of prayer. And basically, in a nutshell, your life is a lot better if you take up regularly prayer. But then now, because we have I'm going to divide this up. We have people who do not believe in prayer. They're I don't want to say atheists, but they don't believe in prayer. We'll say that's this group. And then there's this group who say, and this is very popular these days, to say, I'm spiritual but not religious. You know that, right? And then the third group is people who are religious. The spiritual but not religious will say they pray, but they don't belong to a community. The religious, they pray and they have a community. So they did all these tests on how people endure. Couple. One, did you know that, I'll tell you results. No offense, but if you're religious, the effect of prayer has a great results. If you're spiritual but not religious, not that great of results. If you don't pray at all, well, I hate to say this, your guys' life is tough. You're doomed. But no, it's did you know if you pray regularly and are religious, if you pray regularly, your interleukin 6, which I have no idea it causes inflammation. Your inflammation is reduced, which means you have a much better heart. If you pray regularly, you're less likely to be depressed and recover from depression quicker. You pray regularly, you're less likely to suffer mental illnesses. Um, and then there's all these other studies, like the Michigan study. No, not Michigan. Wisconsin study, where they flew these people all over the world, people who pray regularly. And they flew them to Wisconsin and tested put them in MRIs. Did you know if you pray regularly and are religious, you have the highest ability to concentrate for a long time? Like you might have, I don't know what your degree is, let's say it's dance. No, let's say it's, dance. Let's say he's gone to college and studied dance and maybe, something evil like math, versus somebody who prays regularly. The person who prays regularly actually has more activity in their prefrontal cortex. They can concentrate longer. The Miami study. So they test this in Miami with people who have AIDS, whether religion and prayer really makes a difference. And the results is, even though everybody has this incurable disease, the ones who pray regularly and practice religion, much higher T cell counts. Or the Stanford study, where what was the Stanford study? This sounds kind of strange, but one of the worst things for your health is anger. You heard about like this false theme that if you're a type A person, you're more likely to have a heart attack. That's not true. You're more likely to have a heart attack if you're an angry person. Not all type A people are angry. Anger is actually horrible for your health. So the Stanford study is, let's take people who are religious and pray, or spiritual and don't pray at all. The problem is, if you're religious and you practice this doctrine that, no, you must forgive, the results are you have lower rates of anger. You don't give in to revenge. You get over it quicker, which is much healthier for you on your heart and actually recovering from cancer. So that awful thing and shooting of killing those people in South Carolina, and they're already praying for the angry young man who did it, that's actually incredibly healthy. If you don't learn how to forgive, and let's face it, I'm Irish, forgiving is difficult. But if you don't, you're killing yourself. In the Stanford study, those who pray regularly and religious, more likely to forgive. And so actually, prayer and religion technically does make you healthier and happier. So I work out at Gold's Gym and I eavesdrop on conversations because it's what I do for fun. And you have all these young men who are saying, now, what are you taking and how much protein are you taking? They're so concerned about their diet, which that's a good thing. But I'm always kind of thinking, scientifically you'll be healthier and happier if you pray. But, it's not like you can mention that in the gym. But my point being, so back to the storm. A storm is coming in all of our lives. And what Christ gives us is two things: each other and actually a prayer life. And together, we can make it through any storm. And Job was the first reading. The point of Job is this: Job is a very good person and suffers mightily. Just because you're a good person in prayer doesn't mean horrible things aren't going to happen to you. Jesus steers the boat straight into the storm. Because there's a lot of crazy religious people who think that if you pray, nothing bad will ever happen to you. That's not true at all. Horrible things happen. And maybe like Jill, you'll go through the storm, and what you'll really discover is the divine and the power of prayer and a whole new you. And so our prayer life, it doesn't help avoid the storms. It gets us through the storms. Our prayer life isn't about that nothing bad will ever happen to you. There won't be any storms. Quite the opposite. Our religion and prayer life, it teaches us how to dance in the rain. And so maybe like Jill Taylor, all of us, something awful is going to happen, I got to tell you. But we have everything we need to get through the storms and end up happy and in love with all people.